Welcome to the Sean Chandler Talks About Movies podcast, where I, Sean Chandler, talk about movies. Today is September 12th, 2017. Today we are talking about its box office results, and then we're just going to dive in and start talking about a whole bunch of Star Wars news. They announced J.J. Abrams as the director of Episode 9. He's going to be helped writing the script with Terrio, as well as they pushed the release date back. That's what we're going to be talking about today, and that's about it. No questions stated or anything like that, but lots of Star Wars and a little bit of box office because it did some great numbers. But always remember, I don't want to just talk about movies. I want to talk about movies with you. So join me over on Twitter. My handle is Kirk Never Died. It's Kirk Never Died over on Twitter. Tweet me over there. Let's get a conversation going. I also got a Facebook page at Sean Chandler Talks About. And of course, I am on the YouTubes where I am Sean Chandler Talks About. So find me any one of those places. Let's get a lively discussion going on. And as always, this podcast is brought to you by my supporters on Patreon. Patreon is a way for you to directly support my channel financially. It's kind of that way. If you're a big fan of what I do and you want to help me keep doing it, make it better, upgrade my channel, and just kind of say, hey, I love what you're doing, keep doing it. Check out my Patreon page at the link at the description of this podcast or this video, and you can kind of learn about some of the perks. I post a lot of exclusive videos over there, behind the scenes stuff. I give them feedback into what movies I'm going to review or what ranking videos I'll do. I post some exclusive reviews. I'm also working on doing some like YouTube training stuff and posting it on there because I like teaching people, and I thought that'd be a fun thing to do over on my Patreon page. So please consider checking that out. Without further delay, let's just start talking about our subjects. So this weekend, it debuts in theaters, and everyone expected it to be number one at the box office. Everyone expected it to do really well because the marketing had been good, the buzz had been good, so everyone thought it's going to do great. And they were projecting $50 million, which is a great number for a rated R horror movie. I mean, that's better than the Conjuring movies. That's a great number, $50 million. That's where it's projected. And when I first heard that, I thought, it'll probably be about $40 million. And then the buzz kept growing. The excitement stayed pretty solid and consistent. So I was thinking, 50 million probably sounds pretty good. And then we got about a week out and they started projecting 60 million, 70 million, 75 million. And it kind of kept going up. And I was skeptical. I never, my projected in my brain at no point in time prior to hearing those Thursday night numbers, never would have been 50 million. I just thought, that's a great number. I'm just not drinking the Kool-Aid on this one. I think a bunch of people are overestimating what this movie's going to do and the appeal for this. And then the Thursday night numbers came in and it was like 13 million or something like that. Huge Thursday night numbers. And so the new projection was like $97 million. And I was like, holy cow, boy, was I off on this. And then the Friday numbers come in and they're even higher and it jumps up to like 103. And then the Saturday numbers come in and it jumps up to 117. And then they're like estimate all throughout Sunday, 117. Monday rolls around, it jumps up to 123. So I don't know if they've recalculated it, maybe even jumped up one more time. But the projection was 150. And then the numbers started rolling in and it jumped up to 97. And then it ended up even 20% higher than that after what they heard about on Thursdays. It just kept beating expectation. Is this a movie that cost $35 million to make? The budget for the movie is $35 million. Made over triple that in its opening weekend in the U.S. Just crazy successful. And I liked it. I thought it was a good movie. Like I said, I never drank the Kool-Aid beforehand. I'm not going to drink the Kool-Aid afterwards, but I really liked it. It was a very solid movie. And I can kind of understand where these numbers came from. But at the same time, I mean, bravo, wow, and expect Hollywood to learn all the wrong lessons from this. I don't know. We're probably going to get a ton of new Stephen King adaptations. They're just going to start cranking them out. They're going to start cranking out more Stranger Things type ones. It'll almost certainly learn all the wrong lessons from it. I'm not quite sure what the right lesson is yet. I don't know why this movie was so wildly successful. I mean, the number of box office records it broke. Second largest R-rated debut of all time behind Deadpool. I mean, just in and of itself, that's huge because Deadpool was like this freak out of nowhere success. So that's huge. Biggest September, biggest horror movie opening, biggest R-rated horror movie opening. I guess that would be obvious, but just all these numbers, huge. So here's my speculation. My 6 reasons that its box office was so big. Where did that number come from? How was it so successful? Here's my 6 reasons, my 6 guesses, and it's certainly not one thing. It's not that, they did this right, therefore it made crazy amounts of numbers. No, it's a bunch of things. There's a lot of things that factored into this, and that's why it blew everyone's number. Whatever number anyone estimated, it made more than that. Nobody was saying 120. This movie just bonkers successful. So here's my 6 reasons. Number 1, just had great marketing. That's probably the key thing in any movie. The number it debuts with does it have great marketing? Does it have marketing that gets people talking about it, excited, being like, that looks really good? This movie did that. Like I said, I want to be very clear in all of this. I wasn't going bonkers over the marketing like a lot of people, but so many people loved the marketing for this movie. That's the number 1 factor. Then the number 2 factor that can go right along with great marketing is then the reviews came in. And the reviews didn't come in until 2 days beforehand. They had an embargo that went so crazy late, weird late, because the movie was good. Normally when you have an embargo that late, it's a bad sign. This movie, I don't know why they did it. I would love to hear kind of their reasoning. And there's even some speculation of, did that embargo hurt it? Could it have done better if the embargo was lifted 3, 4, or 5 a week earlier? But not 3, 4, 5 days or a week earlier. But right along with that marketing, great reviews. I mean, when that first batch of reviews came out, it had 39 positive reviews and 1 negative. It was something like that. It was right around the 40 mark, and there's 1 negative. It was at 97% when the first batch came in, and it dropped down to about 89, 90%. That makes sense. That sounds about right for the movie and the quality and type of movie it was. That's not surprising. That's just a great number by any stretch of the imagination. And then you take a genre like horror that is off-putting to a lot of people. It's a movie that has violence against children. It's a book adaptation. There's a number of things in there that could be off-putting to people. That's a crazy good number. Third one, it's from a great author and great source material. Now, I've said this before, I haven't read any Stephen King, so I haven't read it. So when I say it's great source material, great author, that's by reputation. It's a very well-known book from, I think he's the best-selling novelist of all time. Don't quote me on that one, but certainly way up there. As insanely successful of an author as you can be, or has been in the 21st century, or 20th and 21st century. So naturally, they do kind of a significant push to try and adapt one of his more popular books that's got a history to it. They get some buzz. You combine that with good reviews. And so, Stephen King adaptations don't always have the best kind of reputation. Some of them don't go so well. So then it gets great reviews, great buzz. You get just kind of a wave of excitement. You got that brand name recognition, both with the book itself and with the author, combined with great reviews, great marketing. That is a nice push behind your movie to get a lot of butts in seats. From there, you go to great nostalgia. They had the 1990 TV miniseries version of it that a lot of people have huge, fond, nostalgic memories for it. They call Tim Curry's Pennywise iconic. And I've never seen it, so I can't speak for that myself. But so many people in the conversations I've had this last month are, you gotta see it, the miniseries. And for me, I'm like, it's a TV miniseries from 1990. I just can't imagine that that's something I'd enjoy. I've seen a lot of TV movies, TV miniseries from the 90s. And none of them were particularly good, even if this one's got a great performance from Tim Curry, which it's got Tim Curry in it. So you of course, have a great performance from Tim Curry because Tim Curry only gives great performances. Still, it's a TV movie from the 90s. I can't pull myself to watch it. But at the same time, a lot of people have nostalgia for it, just not me. Number 5, it's had a great setup. I didn't actually have a good one. I tried to have a word great something to set each one of these up. Basically, Stranger Things. Stranger Things gave it a setup, set the stage. Now, Stranger Things was clearly influenced by it. I think the creators have stated that. I mean, you could just see some of that, whether the Amblin type stuff influence, Stephen King type influences on it, but clearly that influenced creating Stranger Things. But people love Stranger Things, and they went, I want more of this. Well, the thing that influenced Stranger Things is a thing that is very much like Stranger Things. So a movie comes out and you see kind of kids and there's this bonding type stuff, very similar types of reactions. That was kind of one of my biggest takeaways in trying to convince my wife to maybe see it, was like, it's like Stranger Things, except a little less rated R, a bit more graphic and violent towards children, which then she's like, nope, not going to do it. But there's a clear connection there, clear shared audience. So Stranger Things set the pace and created a desire in an audience for more of that type of thing. And the last one, the sixth reason I think it did so great is great timing. In that August of this year was such a dry spell. I mean, just a barren desert. As a point of reference, I talked about it last week, or did I talk about it 2 weeks ago, that 2 weeks in a row, record level, like 15-year dry spell at the box office. That the 2 weeks ago box office was the lowest since September of 2001, 10 days after September 11th. That's how bad that weekend was. And then the weekend after it was only a pinch better, and it was the worst Labor Day weekend since I think 99 or 2000. So also 17 years going back to get to how bad this weekend was. And then a movie that comes out that's got great marketing, great reviews from a great author and source material, that has great nostalgia for a lot of people, that has a great setup from Stranger Things, comes right after that dry spell. It's a setup for people wanting to go to the movies and see something good. And they go, there you go. I'd like to see that thing. And you put all those together, some mix of those. That's my take on it. How about you? If you're watching this on YouTube, or if you want to chime in over on Twitter, why do you think it is that it did so crazy good? What's the secret sauce? What's the thing that made it happen? Tell me down below. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. All right, real quick, before we start talking about Star Wars, and we're going to spend 20 minutes on Star Wars, I want to talk real quick about MoviePass. MoviePass is the way I pay to go see movies. Basically, it's a subscription. You pay $9.99 per month. They send you a debit card in the mail, and whenever you want to go to the movies, whenever you get to the theater, you got to be at the theater, you use their app that's free for the iPhone and Android phones, and you select the movie you want to go see. It puts the money on your card, and you can go see that movie. You can see a movie every single day of the month for $9.99. It's an insane deal if you like going to the movies. Now, granted, they're a little bit backed up on getting cards out. They've had some customer service issues because the deal's so good. So many people have signed up. They're backlogged. But once you get past that backlog, it's a great service. I've loved using them the last 6 months. I know a few people that have already gotten their cards. It's working great for them. I'd highly encourage you to check it out if you don't already use MoviePass, if you like going to the movies. If you don't like going to the movies, why are you listening to a podcast about movies? But if you could use that link in my description down below, it does help out my channel. I do use the service though, so I do absolutely recommend it. For the rest of the time, we're talking Star Wars. So last week it was announced that Colin Trevorrow outed of Star Wars Episode 9. Creative differences is what they said. Probably, well, I mean, there's a lot of things. I pointed the reason last week towards the Book of Henry, and that movie didn't do well, and so they outed him. And I think that's a big part of it. I think the other part to it is that I think that this movie probably has a very troubled production because Carrie Fisher died. Now, we don't know what's going to happen in Last Jedi, but there's good reason to believe that her death made them have to go rewrite a lot of stuff and change a lot of things. And I've never written a movie, I've never written a book, but I've done a lot of types of creative writing for different sorts of projects. And when you work on something for a long time, it's very easy for you to get locked in on things that are kind of your favorite parts of it, favorite aspects. And trying to make everything work when you're locked in on certain details can be very tricky. So I imagine also what happened in there is she died, and so they had to make a lot of big changes and restructure some things. and he might have been locked in on some stuff that didn't work without her, and there's some tension over that. And they couldn't come to an answer with him as the guy running it. That wouldn't surprise me. That I would think it would be very likely that would be a big part of it too. And so imagine if there was like 4 or 5 months of them struggling to like work that out with him. Book of Henry comes out, bad reviews, bad at the box office, and they go, all right, we're not getting along with him. His last movie didn't do so great. Maybe he's not our guy. And today they announce they are bringing in J.J. Abrams as the replacement guy. So they went back to the guy that made hugely successful Force Awakens, which had great box office, obviously. And then it also had great Rotten Tomato scores. So generally, critics overwhelmingly were like, this is a good movie. And audiences overwhelmingly paid a lot of money to go see it. Now, granted, Phantom Menace sold bukus of tickets as well. And so just selling a lot of tickets doesn't mean your movie's good. But generally speaking, this movie was liked by a lot of people. It has its detractors. Generally speaking, people went, JJ, he brought it back. He gave us a lot of fun. He made Star Wars fun again. Criticisms over soft reboot or soft remake of A New Hope. Okay, sure. But he made it fun. He gave us something good that was Star Wars. So he's announced today as the guy. What's my take on JJ returning for it? My first impression is just it's tough because I'm kind of feeling is this sense of disappointment. But it's not JJ. I love JJ. I loved his 2 Star Trek movies, even Into Darkness. I love The Force Awakens, even with its faults. I loved his Mission Impossible movie. I'm a big fan of Super 8. Well, not a big fan. I enjoyed Super 8. I loved Lost. I loved Alias. I'm a big fan of his. He worked on Armageddon. Armageddon's my favorite Michael Bay movie. He did Forever Young, the script of that Mel Gibson movie from 25 years ago. I'm a big fan of J.J. Abrams. Or maybe he worked on Regarding Henry. Regarding Henry, it's with the one where Harrison Ford gets shot in the head. So I guess he worked with Harrison Ford 25 years or 20-something years before he worked with him on Force Awakens. Big fan of J.J. Abrams. So when I say I have a sense of disappointment over him being selected, it's not a J.J. Abrams thing. If they'd announced when they first announced these movies, J.J. Abrams going to do a trilogy of Star Wars movies, he's working with Lawrence Kasdan, I would have been super pumped about it. My problem here is really my problem with Disney Star Wars. As Kathleen Kennedy and whoever's her boss, whatever the decision-making team is that's playing it so safe in everything that they're doing, that... I mean, you just stop and think about when we found out that they were going to make Star Wars again. We were getting more Star Wars. Disney bought it. I thought Disney was a great pick. And then I said in a little bit like, they're a little bit corporate. They're playing a little bit safe at times. They're like, no, they're going to make them spin-off movies. And you jump forward 5 years because it's been 5 years now since they announced all this. I think they announced it late October of 2015. 2015, no, 2012 they announced, I believe. Here are 5 years later, and look at what they've announced. First movie has a new Death Star movie. Second movie, old Death Star movie. Second spinoff, Han Solo movie. Second spinoff, or third spinoff, Obi-Wan Kenobi movie. You notice a pattern here? Sameness, safe, obvious. And that's where I get afraid and I get nervous because I just can only feel disappointed when I look at what they're doing and they're not coming up with something smarter than what I'd come up with. Now, the execution is better than I could execute, but the actual premise that's being greenlit, the basic idea of these movies is not smarter than me. And so when I think about Kathleen Kennedy, her job selecting directors and selecting movies, which projects to greenlight, she picked J.J. Abrams for The Force Awakens, which I think was probably the most obvious choice. After what he did with Star Trek, everyone went, he turned Star Trek into Star Wars. He was kind of the most obvious pick. My first choice pick was actually Brad Bird. JJ was probably in my top 5. I think that's what I said back in the day. So when they picked him, I was like, oh, that's cool. That's awesome. And even now, that doesn't change. That's still true. I would still say that. But they picked a guy that I would pick. They picked an obvious choice for it. And then they did a soft remake of A New Hope. And then they did a prequel to A New Hope. And then they announced Han Solo, prequel to A New Hope. And then they announced Obi-Wan Kenobi, solo movie, a prequel to A New Hope. Do you notice a pattern here? And so that's where I just look at what they're doing and I just go, wow, what? You're supposed to be smarter than me. You're not supposed to be coming up with the stuff that every fanboy was like, oh, I hope that they do a Han Solo. I hope they do that Obi-Wan. That's where I'm nervous. And it's not a JJ thing. It's not that it's not even that I think the movies will be bad. It's a disappointment at the loss of what could be. They could be making better. They could be taking more interesting risks. And if they were like kind of play it safe with the episodes and go bonkers with the spinoffs, not bonkers. Just Knights of the Old Republic. That's not bonkers. It's risky. It's not as easy to market. But it's a movie that you go, wow, you could do all sorts of stuff if you did that. You could set it in the future of Star Wars. You could do kind of, a fistful of dollars, except with a Jedi set 10 years after Revenge of the Sith. Some lone Jedi off on his own, all these abilities, cynical, angry, and he's off, and it's kind of like a fistful of dollars. No ties to the Empire, really, just loose references, but set in the Star Wars world. I mean, all kinds of stuff that you could do that would be different and interesting, and make a Star Wars movie that's this fistful of dollars movie that has a budget of under $100 million. It doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be join the $1 billion club to be profitable. It needs to make like $300 million. It's very profitable if it does that. All sorts of things you could do, but then they go with soft remake of A New Hope, prequel to A New Hope, prequel to A New Hope, prequel to A New Hope. I just don't get it. And so that's my first thoughts on it. It's not negative on JJ. It's just going back to JJ is just another safe, obvious pick. And when you look at it and you look at their track record of the guys they've hired, and they fire Josh Trank, they fire Colin Trevorrow, they fire Lord and Miller, that's not good. That's a really bad batting average on director fires. And when they kind of went out, like they took a risk on someone, they ended up firing them. They took a risk and then they backed off as soon as it wasn't comfortable. That says risk aversion. Like they took a risk and then they went, ooh, we're afraid now that we're seeing what you're doing. I don't like that. That makes me uncomfortable with what they're doing. Let some guys can we at least see a bad Star Wars movie where someone botches it before we just always have to micromanage it and run it through board meetings of everyone trying to make the safest, most marketable movie possible? That's why I just, I obviously want all Star Wars to be good. I just don't want it all feel so corporate, so safe, and so risk averse. That's kind of my big problem with all of it. So anyway, some of that's just rambly type thoughts in there. It's like one of those ones you have a bunch of emotions and you're like, I don't know where to lash out with all this. I don't know what to do with it. I just feel the sense of disappointment, even though I love JJ. I don't think he's a bad choice. I don't think he's going to do a bad job. I think in the general sense, he's a great choice to direct a Star Wars movie based off his past track record before he directed a Star Wars movie, based on his track record of directing a Star Wars movie. I think he's a good choice. But in the context of the safeness, the risk aversion, the let's get Ron Howard to direct a movie, I just see JJ and I go, ooh, man, I just hope whenever they make their next batch of announcements, whatever, if that's a year from now, whenever they start to kind of line some stuff up, I hope it gets interesting is what I'm really hoping, that it stops feeling like stuff I could come up with. So moving from J.J. Abrams in my initial reaction, then they said Chris Terrio is going to write the script with J.J. Abrams. So Chris Terrio worked on Ben Affleck's Argo. That's a really good piece to have on your resume. So he did that one. Argo blows up at the Oscars. All sorts of controversy because Ben Affleck wasn't nominated for Best Director. A bunch of people angry about that. But I mean, it's just, bonkers successful with award season. So Chris Terrio, being Ben Affleck's kind of guy, ends up getting pulled over to work on that big exciting project Ben Affleck was working on a couple years ago called Batman v Superman. So Chris Terrio is the guy that writes the script. That's Batman v Superman. Now, story comes from Zack Snyder, and then David Goyer worked on it, and then Chris Terrio's kind of the final guy that brought it together, and then there's all sorts of speculation of Ben Affleck sitting in his trailer, rewriting his dialogue with Alfred, so that's why his dialogue with Alfred seems to be a little bit better than the Henry Cavill with Lois Lane dialogue. But the movie, obviously, even if you I like Batman v Superman. I'd give it a thumbs up. I would recommend it. I think there's enough good stuff in there for people to, I think people are a little bit too critical of it. At the same time, I get it. I get why you're too critical of it. I get why you don't like it. I get why you trash it. So I understand fully. And a lot of that goes back to a jumbled bonker script. And I don't fully blame Chris Terrio for that. I think my theory on where Batman v Superman came from is it was supposed to be Man of Steel 2, and then they went, hey, if we can put Batman in this, it'll do better, and we can get more money for it, and what if, and so then they had an outline and an idea for Man of Steel 2, and then it turned into Batman v Superman, so they just added Batman into this sort of script that already had the villain as Lex Luthor, and Lex Luthor responding to the events, and so then what if it was both Bruce Wayne and Lex Luthor responding to it, and then it went, let's make a shared universe as long as we're putting Batman in there, let's go all in and make it Dawn of Justice, and so then they squeezed in all this other stuff. And then it was this script written over a period of time and rewritten. And I think the concept behind it, the big idea, changed constantly. So Chris Terrio, I don't remember if he won an Oscar for Argo, but great, wrote a movie that won Best Picture. Chris Terrio writes Batman v Superman, a movie with a very jumbled story and script, with some scenes that are now infamous in the world, whether that's the Martha scene and weird dream scenes, all sorts of scenes in there that are infamous for being bonkers and weird. Well, he wrote them. At least his name says he wrote them. Written name in the credits says he wrote them. Then next up, he's got a movie with an even more insane backstory with the writing process with Justice League, which also was written over a period of time, last-minute rewrites to change the tone of it. Then with the tragic leaving of Zack Snyder, Joss Whedon comes in, massive rewrites to the level to do these reshoots that he's given screenwriting credit, which is crazy bonkers that something would like that would happen. So even whatever we see in Justice League doesn't really tell me how Chris Terrio handles big blockbusters. And this is another kind of jumbled, weird mess thing. And they picked that guy to come in to work with JJ on Star Wars Episode 9. I see Chris Terrio and I get nervous. When I think of Argo, I think he was working with Ben Affleck on Oscar bait stuff. And Ben Affleck has a 20-year history of being a great filmmaker and storyteller. Now, as an actor, what roles he picked when he's kind of at his peak of young Oscar stud and Geely and some of that stuff, not great choices. But he wrote Good Will Hunting 20 years ago. And then he became a director 10, 11 years ago. Great director. So Chris Terrio works with Ben Affleck. He's working with a very talented storyteller. Then when Chris Terrio works with Zack Snyder and David Goyer type things, the result is not as good. So I'm just skeptical of him. I don't think Chris Terrio to me isn't a name that makes me go, that guy's awesome. I go, I don't know. He's done an amazing thing and he's done a not so amazing thing. And the not so amazing thing has a lot of excuses. There's a lot of good reasons not to pin that on him. So the verdict's out on him. I just don't know. I don't know. Final piece on there is that they announced that they're pushing the release date back to December of 2019, which in my mind, I don't know why they ever put it in May. That always seemed kind of like a weird decision. I know what they're trying to do, and it's better to have I guess it's better to have a May release date, but I mean, given the results of The Force Awakens, you don't need the summer release date. So I always thought that was a little bit odd because clearly they've proven you can be awesome in December. They were awesome in December. But a good choice given this transition, this change. Giving him a little bit more, give him enough time to make things right, whatever changes he needs to make. And just even kind of rushing it in light of the Carrie Fisher thing, assuming she was going to have a big part in episode 9, just seems to make a lot of sense. So that's my quick take on all this stuff. Yeah. How about you guys? Tell me on Twitter. If you're watching on YouTube, let me know on there as well. What's your take on it, on JJ, the Chris Terrio, the change of the release date? Are you kind of as disappointed as me? I had a long conversation with one of my fellow YouTube friends, Rachel Wagner, and she had the opposite response. She was excited, pumped about it, and kind of disagreed with me pretty strongly on some of my frustrations about the risk aversion. And she had some good points about do what you're good at. And yeah, that's not a bad argument. If your choice is, kind of maybe generic, safe Star Wars versus Attack of the Clones that has some fresh new ideas in it, hey, maybe it's a good idea that we go with safe. I'm not quite there. I would like a little bit more risk in some of this, but it's not a bad argument. What do you think? Tell me on the Twitters, in the comment section. All right, so that'll do it for today's show. Be sure, if you like this podcast, subscribe to the actual podcast itself on in the iTunes store. Leave a rating, leave a comment. It helps me out and kind of where I rank on some of that, so I can start to get a little bit of traction and grow my grow my podcast audience, not just via YouTube. So if you would do that, I would greatly appreciate it. Also, like I said, if you're a big fan of my content, want to go that extra mile supporting what I'm doing, please consider supporting me directly on Patreon. That does help out my channel, and it helps kind of me expand what I'm doing, and it makes it so I can make this podcast. And as always, thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you guys so much for listening.